joining me today is Richard Hanania. He is a writer and commentator and a columnist for Unheard. And you also have a Substack, richardhanania.com, where you write about foreign policy, American politics, and social science. Richard, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here, Maya.
So lately, I have been talking to people that have changed their minds, who've left ideological movements or seriously questioned worldviews they once held really close. Let's go back to several years ago, which is in 2023, when an investigation by the Huffington Post uncovered that in the early 2010s, you had a pseudonym, which was Richard Host. And under that pseudonym, you wrote several articles, posts that were racist, misogynistic, and generally pretty inflammatory. And then only a few days later after that investigation came out, you posted on your Substack under the title, Why I Used to Suck and Hopefully No Longer Do, My Road to Small L Liberalism, which you publicly reckoned with those bad ideas and described the path that led you away from them. I'm really excited to talk to you today about why, in your words, you used to suck and you no longer do, and how that transformation happened. So maybe let's start with your alter ego, which is Richard Host. How did that persona come to be, and who was Richard Hanania back then?
So the name has no real significance. It's just my first name and first initial. I was pretty much nobody. I mean, I was undergrad at the time. I was at University of Colorado. I was on the internet. I was reading a lot of stuff. I had some good intellectual influences, a lot of bad intellectual influences. I kind of fell into this world where basically whatever the opposite of the mainstream, whatever the opposite of the mainstream left was doing, this was something that I had to embrace if someone had a crazy idea or some kind of take on some historical event or some kind of question that seemed to be taboo. I was kind of drawn to that. So this was back 2009, 2010. It was the early days of the internet. Over time, I stopped writing these articles like 15 years ago. And like 10 years later, I started emerging under my own name, and that kind of was well behind me. And by that point, I was kind of concerned even by 2023 that it seemed like that a lot of the right had gone in the direction that I was in 2009, 2010. A lot of the arguments that I was making at the time, a lot of the just kind of worldview that I had become really, really mainstreamed. And so this was disturbing. And this is something I talked about to a large extent before the expose came out in 2023, and something that I think I've been more vindicated on over the last few years. So yeah, I mean, how do you kind of like explain this? There's an idea. It starts like a lot of people, wokeness is bad. These things that these leftists talk about, like America being a white supremacist country, like there being no differences between men and women. You would see the biases in the mainstream media, and a lot of people have seen that. And some people tend to go in the opposite direction. If they say racism is bad, I say racism is good. If you say sexism is bad, I say sexism is good. If you think minority groups need to have a group identity, then white people need to have a group identity. It's kind of just a reflexive, bizarro version of whatever you happen to hate. And I really have come over the years to just detest this. I mean, at some point you have to grow up and you have to say, I have to have some principles here rather than believing the opposite of what the people I don't like believe.
I want to read you some of the things you wrote as Richard Host. Women's liberation equals the end of human civilization. The ultimate goal should be to get all the post-1965 non-white migrants from Latin America to leave. Fat people not only are disgusting to look at, their obesity reflects some ugly personality traits. If we want to defend our liberty and property, a low IQ group of a different race sharing the same land is a permanent antagonist. I wonder first, it's one thing to kind of have this reflexive response to the excess of woke, which I think a lot of people did. It's another thing to kind of write these statements publicly. So I wonder, why did you decide to, instead of just maybe having these arguments in whatever it was, your college classes or in social situations, why did you take to the internet?
Yeah. Whenever I see those quotes, they come to my attention every now and then. Honestly, it's Most of the time I don't remember them. Obviously, this was 16 years ago, and I've tried to block it out of my mind. The question why I started to write these things, I don't know. Why does anyone write? I mean, why do any of us go to the internet and express our opinions? Usually, it's not because you're going to make the most money. If you're going to succeed as a writer, you're probably not going to make as much money as if you're a highly intelligent person with a good work ethic, you'll probably make a lot more money doing something else. Why do I write now? I mean, I don't know. There's a compulsion I think some people have to express their opinions and stuff. I was young at the time and maybe immature and going through some things, and maybe my ideas weren't probably the world didn't need to hear them. They probably weren't something that benefited humanity. But why I express myself, I don't know. Like, well, why does anyone do this?
But you had the wherewithal to have a pseudonym, which was expressing your opinions, but without it being attached to your real name, which would have had, maybe more risk attached. So why in the first place did you decide, I'm not putting this under my real name for now?
So I think you read the quotes. I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, it would be bad, obviously, for going on to live a normal life. Anonymity is kind of a big thing on the online right these days. I think today it's probably you could get away with a lot more. The kind of Overton window has opened up a lot, but still people don't want to necessarily stand behind what they say. I've come to think that anonymity is it's not that we have to go around doxing people or it should be illegal or anything like that. But I think it's in some cases it can be appropriate when somebody has something to say that's important and they're maybe going to get canceled from their job or something like that. But I think a lot of the times it kind of brings you into the public conversation without giving you any responsibility for what you're saying. There's no kind of accountability. You could drop your pseudonym and go do something else. You can troll. It makes it too easy to kind of attack people and to be inflammatory. So yeah, I had enough awareness that this was probably not something that I wanted attached to my own name. And that's probably why a lot of the things I said were reflected poor judgment.
You've described that period in your life as one of self-loathing. You didn't have a lot of friends, not a lot of romantic prospects. And that in that vacuum, you kind of came to the logical conclusion that you were just superior to everyone else. How do you understand the way you develop these ideas in the first place beyond just a reflexiveness to the left?
Yeah, self-loathing. I don't know if I ever used the term self-loathing. I think I had a pretty decently high opinion of myself. Maybe a kind of grievance that I wasn't kind of recognized enough. I hadn't accomplished anything, so why would anyone recognize me at the time? I was just some undergrad somewhere. But yeah, there is the personal thing where you find that people often who have the angriest politics, who have the most extreme politics, often don't have the most going on in their personal lives. Often they think about there could be some kind of other system or some kind of other social arrangement, in which case people will recognize my genius. I think the IQ thing is an easy trap to fall into, because if you're smart but you've never done anything, you don't know anybody, you don't have connections, you might not have social skills, you're young and you haven't done anything, for even if no fault of your own, you can start to worship intelligence, like everyone should just be given an IQ test, and the people who score high should rule over everyone else. That's kind of how our society, that's kind of to a certain extent how our society works. But yeah, it's just the easiest thing you could hold on to if you're smart and you want some reason to feel good about yourself.
I wonder if you can give me a sense of what your life was like at the time. Are you in your dorm room writing these posts and then going out and hanging out with people and not saying these things and biting your tongue all the time? Like, what did your life look like?
No, I didn't really go out. I didn't really, I wasn't really the most social person. I never lived in the dorms. I lived right off campus. I was at the University of Colorado. And yeah, just spent a lot of time alone reading. I mean, not everything I did was just racist posting. There was, intellectual, there was books, there was other things, but I was an early adopter of just like being, I think that's much more common these days, but kind of living your life online. So unfortunately, there's not a lot that's exciting there. I would actually speak up in public. That's one thing where it's like I wouldn't say these things that I was saying in these articles, obviously, but it was at the University of Colorado. I don't know if people are familiar with that school, but at least at the time, I don't know if it still is. It was kind of a hippie school. They say it's like the Berkeley of the Rockies, so very, very left wing. And so I would argue with students and professors. Like the war on terror was a big deal at the time. There was a lot of political correctness surrounding Islam. These things have reoccurred in the last few years with the war in Gaza. But no, I think that maybe, yeah, I wasn't that social, but also I really wasn't afraid to express my opinion.
How did you define your political ideology at the time? Would you have described yourself as being alt-right? How did you view your political alignment?
Yeah, I think alt-right. I was even wrote for a website called alternativeright.com. It was part of the first generation that coined the term. And the idea was basically there was this mainstream Republican Party. And, we should hopefully at some point talk about like how much this has become the mainstream discourse around kind of the MAGA right. We were early to this. In 2009, 2010, there was this mainstream Republican Party. Oh, they fought wars for Israel. Oh, they're politically correct. They're not talking about these demographic issues. They're not talking about immigration. It's kind of like some kind of, identity politics for white people is necessary. So yeah, I think alt-right was probably kind of, yeah, I think I did embrace that label. I must have, because I wrote for those websites.
Did you see yourself as a white supremacist? Because the thing that's hard to understand is you have this reflexive reaction, which is to when the left says one thing, for you to say the opposite. And I wonder where the line was for you between really believing these things, that white people are smarter or better, and that that's just what you had to say because it's the opposite of everyone else is saying.
I don't know if those two things are necessarily distinguishable. Why do people come to any conclusion? People usually come to a conclusion often for psychological reasons. And sometimes they don't consciously believe those things, but a lot of times they do convince themselves of those things. So I don't think that there is the psychological explanation detracts from the idea that these were genuine beliefs. I think they're kind of one and the same.
What was the online community of people, these sites you're writing for, that you were interacting with? And did they know that you were writing under a pseudonym?
Oh yeah, they knew. It was common to write under pseudonyms in these kind of websites. It was just like, people understood that this wasn't smart stuff to put under your own name. They were, it was more intellectual kind of than a lot of the right-wing content was. I mean, this was before Twitter was a big thing. These were like message boards, not really even message boards, like actually online magazines. And so the community was, people just basically sitting around publishing articles, a lot of navel gazing, a lot of, just kind of idea that we're sitting here and we're important people and we're one day going to change the world. Actually, again, it did end up having a large effect, but they were actually like quite bookish. I mean, I think a lot of the reputation of like online right-wing people are less intellectual than they were at the time. There was no real conspiracy theories. I mean, that's become a kind of a big thing. Like these people were often college educated and intellectuals and kind of bookish, like the way I was. There was none of this, anti-vax stuff. There wasn't just like this kind of like social media induced kind of, craziness or inability to think. There were people who actually would recommend books and like scientific papers and like, and yeah, write long essays with like footnotes and stuff like that. So it's interesting. It was kind of a bookish intellectual kind of community that eventually reached out to like the broader right and became less so, over time.
So at what point do you decide that you're going to stop writing under a pseudonym, and why? Was it that you stopped believing these things, or that you were fundamentally changing and the grievances you had, you just no longer had?
Kind of. So I got into the University of Chicago Law School in 2010. And I don't know, it was like I had a friend who told me, you know what, society finally gave you some kind of recognition. It's like you got into a good college. So now you feel like, you don't need this stuff anymore. But yeah, I got into the University of Chicago Law School in 2010. I bummed around for a year after I graduated college, didn't know what to do. Got into the University of Chicago Law School, thought I was going to, maybe become a lawyer or something. And It's not like overnight I said, I no longer have these beliefs. I'm now a normal conservative or whatever. But over time, it kind of became less extreme. When I emerged like years later, I was still pretty right wing. And I'm still kind of right wing on like economic issues. I've become more left wing on these kind of identity issues that I've seen where this stuff leads personally and for movements as a whole. But yeah, it was just like life went on. I mean, how long can you sit there writing these anonymous articles? Eventually, you move on with life.
But when did you stop believing the things that you had been writing? It's less about the action of being holed up in your room writing these things. Was there a moment or something that happened that you said that you started to question yourself?
It was more gradual than, one day I woke up and said this was wrong. So over the 2010s, immigration was like a big issue for these people on the alt-right. It was the number one issue. Basically, they just cared about they just wanted to restrict immigration because, again, they had a racial-centric worldview. And there was a lot of, predictions that were made based on that. So I read Patrick Buchanan, a couple of his books, Suicide of a Superpower, a couple others really talking about, one was called like America and the Third World Invasion, the Third World Invasion of America or something like that. There was Ann Coulter's book, Adios America, which I think came out circa 2015. And they made actual predictions of what would happen over the course of the 2010s. Buchanan would predict that Americans in the Southwest would try to break off, that Mexican Americans would try to join Mexico. A lot of people predicted, the crime rate would go through the roof. A lot of people predicted there would be like social unrest because you couldn't have a racially diverse nation. It would fall apart. And there was idea that these people, would never vote Republican. They were just natural Democrats and natural socialists. None of that happened. I mean, I moved to California in 2013, and race relations are generally fine. I mean, I've lived in cities that are 90% Asian and Hispanic. On the macro level, I mean, I'm kind of person who looked at data, strangely. I mean, a lot of the friends I had back then still believed the same things, and very few of them ever like looked at data and saw whether predictions came true or didn't come true, and then adjusted their opinions accordingly. I did in my case. The American crime rate, did not increase until the events of 2020. American economically was doing fine. Hispanics, these other groups, they were assimilating well. The DEI stuff did become a big deal, and I was opposed to that, but it was a manageable problem that eventually you could deal with through regular political channels. There wasn't anything inevitable about it as America became less white. So it was just a lot of like evidence, like reality refuted a lot of things I believed back then.
So by early 2020s, you're penning op-eds in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal under your real name. And while they might have been controversial, they were not bigoted. I wonder first if there were times you were nervous about people knowing what you previously posted, and what it kind of felt like to have this attention on you under your real identity for things that maybe a few years ago you would have thought were ridiculous.
Yeah, it was a kind of fear in the back of my mind. When it actually happened, when the Huffington Post expose came out, I was a little bit relieved. It was always like this was kind of this, this cloud that was hanging over me. And eventually it was going to come out. My operational security at the time, it wasn't that big of like a secret. Like I think a lot of people knew. So there was always possible that it would happen. I was, I thought it might happen, and I thought, what am I going to do if it happens? It was interesting because, it was like I, had written these things under my one name, and then I started to write things under my own name, and it was like, okay, there's actually, and a lot of the things I wrote, they weren't complete. It wasn't like some of the concerns I had, like DEI, affirmative action, which had taken off and become much more extreme by the time I started writing in 2020, 2021. A lot of that stuff I was still against, and I was writing against that. And for like left-wing people, they'll be like, oh, he never changed. He's against DEI. Therefore, he's the same person he was in 2009. But it just kind of showed me that like there is a space to like make reasonable arguments related to public policy issues. And, even if it's like, seems like you're going to be canceled or whatever at the time, like if you approach these things with like good faith and good values, and you can make actually the arguments, you can have an impact. And so I think some of my work there did have an impact. And then, it happened in 2023. The Huffington Post did this, impressive expose. They really, really connect the dots. And at that point, thankfully, I was thankful that I had like 3-4 years of writing under my own name. I wasn't just somebody starting out. I think that would have kind of nuked my career. So at that point, I think I'd built a reputation for honesty and for some thoughtfulness. And so, people could see that.
Yeah, I think there was a level of intellectual honesty, which was you could see this kind of intellectual transition that was wrestling very seriously with these issues, but there was a lack of transparency. And I wonder why you didn't just come out and say, I used to think these things that I no longer do. I wrote under this pseudonym. Like if there was this feeling that it would kind of come out no matter what was stopping you from like almost pre-canceling yourself?
Yeah. It's a good question. I would see these, people would send me texts from group chats, like people who hated me had kind of figured it out. And so this was going on for a year or two. What had happened, it was probably going to happen. That thought did cross my mind, pre-canceling myself. I think that it's you have to get back to what the world was like in 2020, 2021, 2022. People were being canceled for all kinds of stuff. I don't think it was realistic for me to come out and say I was this white supremacist 10, 12 years. Unless I went complete, I'd become like a Marxist or something, right? I don't think it was conceivable to still be conservative and to have had these views and to been able to continue writing for a broad public. I wasn't that famous. I was kind of, getting well known. Looking back on it, it's kind of like if I was like maybe as, prominent as I am now and this still hadn't come out, maybe it would be like an interesting part of my story because people could look at it. But I don't think it's a luxury I would have had just starting out being new on the scene.
Were there people that had embraced you under your real name that when they found this out thought differently of you?
So it's very interesting. I watched the Twitter kind of conversation. I had to log off for a few days. My name was like one of the biggest trending terms on all of Twitter. And so I logged off and it was very kind of polarized. The people who didn't like me before still didn't like me. And the people who did like me, continued to like me. And so, there were very few like who said, I like this guy's articles, but now I think, he's a bad person or whatever. I think because people kind of know me. I write a newsletter. I write a lot. They're long essays that are personal, that go deep into my reasoning. I'm reacting in real time. Sometimes maybe even still, I don't show always the best judgment in tweeting or whatever. But still, I think people who had become fans or had come to admire my work knew that I was an honest and thoughtful person. And so there was like a few days there where like, oh, this is horrible. Like he must still think this stuff. There was some of that, but then after I wrote that Substack in response to what happened, which was a few days later, there really weren't a lot of people out there who thought that I was, that thought I was okay before, that still thought I was beyond the pale. Now, if you go to like Blue Sky or something, they're going to say, well, he was a racist then, he's a racist now. My God, why does anyone talk to him? But those people hated me no matter what. So it's kind of it's polarized along those lines.
What were your parents thinking, your friends? Were they shocked by this? And how did you kind of explain yourself or kind of rebuild trust?
So my parents are my parents are immigrants from the Middle East. They are not plugged into whatever is happening online in America. So they probably didn't even notice it, honestly. It's just like, oh, my son has been on TV. Oh, he's been in newspapers. Isn't that cool? So I was kind of lucky in that way. And my family was just completely, unplugged to it. I have, a wife and kids. The kids are too young. The wife doesn't care too much about politics. Most of my friends in my social circles were, in fact, by that point, people who I knew in politics. So, people who liked me before still liked me, and the people who didn't still didn't like me. So maybe I was kind of lucky in that way, and that there wasn't really much of that concern.
Were there people or conversations you had in that phase of coming out, so to speak, either kind of from your past life or maybe people that you were just becoming acquainted with, that changed your mind more or made you think differently?
So it's very interesting. I was getting a lot of attention at the time, and this is why they were, this was the justification in the Huffington Post piece. A lot of right-wing Silicon Valley people like my work. Elon Musk like followed me on Twitter like a week after it happened as like I guess a show of solidarity, and so a lot of these people were like. They were like, yeah, don't apologize, don't say anything. You just tell them to f off, and you on one hand you want to be grateful. Okay, people are want to stand by you and they want to they want to stand with you, and they dislike the people who are trying to destroy you. At one level that's very nice. At the same time, I really, really didn't like the things I had been writing at the time. And so I think a lot of people on the right at the time would have been very happy if I said, I stand by it all, or, it was all trolling, or, whatever, doxing is bad. And so whatever I said, it doesn't matter at this point. There's a guy named Mike Benz, who got doxxed for being something similar, a kind of similar story. And he went and he said, and this is just completely dishonest, he went and said he was undercover to expose anti-Semitism or something among, alt-right people. And I knew Mike Benz at the time. That's not true. Nobody with a brain can believe that's true. That makes no sense. And they embraced him because there was this idea that you're telling them to F off. You're not buying into their frame. So if you lie or you just take a strong stand against what these people are saying or trying to do, that's a good thing. And I hated that. It was like my instinct was I had these ideas. I could have said it's all trolling. I could have said I was an undercover agent like Mike Benz was and trying to expose these people. But I wanted to live with honesty and I wanted to live with integrity. So people ask me, did you really believe these things? I say, yeah, I really believe these things. And it was kind of like they stood by me, but it was also like, further alienated me from the right. It's because it's like you should have questions in that case. Like I don't blame anyone who says you used to write these things. Why did you write them? How do you feel about them now? That's the kind of question that people should ask.
You've kind of spoken out against people now writing under pseudonyms. Do you think it's corrosive to do that now? Do you view it differently than you did then?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, it was kind of, I was in this anti-leftist attitude. Oh, these people want to cancel you. So you kind of have to fight them with whatever tools you have. If you want to be, that might be anonymity, that might be, personal attacks or whatever. I think that the anonymity thing, it's like people just behave worse. I'll tell you, I go through life and I go to events and I meet people. No one has ever been rude to me in public, like based on my writing or my public persona. I go on Twitter, like half the comments are some, people hate me for some reason or another. And it's just clear that like being online and 80% of those, 90% of those are anonymous. So it's being online plus being anonymous, I think just gives people an opportunity to just kind of be nasty and not be very thoughtful. I understand the argument for anonymity. There's some views, I think less so as time goes on. It's kind of, it's been expanded what's allowed. But, if you're writing in academia in 2019, 2020, it's a different story where you can be canceled for, opinions that were completely reasonable, that you could provide evidence and reason for. We saw that happening all the time. So I understood it. I understood it at the time. I just think you have to treat it very responsibly. You have to be kind of the person who's not going to make personal attacks. You actually are focusing on the ideas. And I think like, as time goes on and, people are allowed to say more and more things. I mean, their biggest podcasters in the country are people who would have been canceled and would have been given any platform 10, 15 years ago. There's less of a need for it as time goes on. Now, there's going to be individual cases where someone's in a special situation. But I think, general, a norm of anonymity, there should be a presumption against it. And if people are anonymous, they should have a really, really good reason for it.
So you wrote in the Substack after the Huffington Post one, that as you kind of found this more fulfilling life, these quasi-fascist ideas went away, and that this Richard host was really a symptom kind of being, in your words, a bit of a loser. Is that the lens through which you see and understand people like Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson, who don't write under pseudonyms, but say things actually quite proudly that you were writing back as Richard Host?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, Tucker Carlson himself is like a loser. He's got a family, he's very wealthy, he's very successful. Fuentes, too. I mean, is obviously at this point in his life, very successful. It has a lot of money and social approval and such from the people he'd want. But yeah, I think the audience for these people, it is something you take the women thing. Um, if you're a man and you cannot attract women, it kind of becomes the center of your identity because men, Maya, I don't know if you know how men are. Men are thinking about women all the time. They're thinking about, wanting to be with women. They're thinking about it's not just the sex. It's also kind of like the approval. It's the idea that they're rejecting you as a whole if you can't find any woman who's willing to date you, and that kind of becomes all consuming. So I think the Fuentes fan base in particular, which is younger, I think maybe the Tucker fan base is a little bit older. I've actually saw data, recently showing that this is indeed the case. But kind of Fuentes, these Andrew Tate fans, kind of the younger, more online influencers, I think they're to a large extent driven by resentment, sexual frustration, and these theories come along with it. Who are women to reject me? Why we used to not give them right to vote? Why do we listen to them? They're emotional. You can have this scientific sounding justification for a lot of this stuff. You could have this evolutionary psychology kind of bastardized evo psych. But yeah, that's a lot of, I think, what's going on here. I mean, the fact that these ideas are a lot more prevalent than they was 15 years ago, and the fact that young people are dating less, they're going outside less, they're having less impersonal relationships. I don't think those things are unrelated. I think the politics and the kind of social situation are very closely linked.
With Fuentes, it's interesting because the success that he's found is for saying, frankly, a lot of the same things that you did as host. I wonder if you had seen that success that he has for saying really like pretty much the same things, if your mind would have been changed or if it's like a matter of audience capture.
Yeah, the it's not just Fuentes. I mean, you look at some like a lot of the administration rhetoric, like the Department of Homeland Security. If you look at the Twitter account, it's all these kind of white nationalist dog whistles. I mean, Stephen Miller, he was reading a lot of the same websites at the time. A lot of the rhetoric about white people being replaced, about Democrats getting a permanent majority through immigration, the attacks on legal and illegal immigration, regardless of kind of the situation of the immigrants. Yeah, these things have kind of taken over. Can you persuade people away from these things? I don't know. It's like I've tried to persuade people away from these things. If people look at my writing, a lot of it is like stuff that I'm writing that would have been directed at myself like 10 or 15 years ago. Like, for example, the immigration and crime link. I wrote a long article on that, just really digging into the data because that's something that I once believed. And immigrants basically commit less crime than Americans. That's been the case for as long as we have data. And so some people are going to, I think, be convinced of that. There is some percentage, I think probably the more intellectually inclined, who are going to look at that stuff and be like, okay, not everyone's going to read like, scientific studies with statistical analysis of crime between different groups. And they're just kind of, angry and failing in life. And they're latching onto this ideology, the kind of white nationalist or fascist adjacent ideology in order to feel better. I think for those people, I mean, you're going to have to, I think we need to figure out kind of the social stuff. I think the kind of the mental health issues, the rise in anxiety, the, lack of coupling, the lack of people living online and not going outside. I think solving of that is going to go a long way to solving these other political problems.
I want to talk a little bit about what you believe now. You've kind of identified as small L liberalism. What is that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I believe that basically humanity lived in a terrible state for most of our existence. That in the last few centuries, since the Industrial Revolution, thanks to liberal democracy, thanks to capitalism, thanks to science, thanks to the ideals of an enlightenment, life has gotten much better. There's been challenges too, obviously, but in the long run, history has kind of gotten better. And I think that the classical liberal values, which a lot of people think have failed, haven't actually failed. If you look at the U.S. economic situation compared to Europe, people are still risking their lives to get here. American living standards, when you look at kind of objectively, are getting better. And a lot of our problems, I think, are turning away from these ideas. I think there's a kind of mood affiliation where people are angry because what they're seeing online, maybe their lives aren't the best, or they're kind of being radicalized because they're going on social media and they're getting into these bubbles and they're seeing that, they're always seeing the worst of the other side and being told these narratives that these people, the other side of the political spectrum, are these evil people who want to destroy them. And, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of that stuff is just the narratives are false. And I'm trying to kind of shake people out of a lot of these kind of more pessimistic narratives and get them to understand that, yeah, this kind of liberal democracy thing, Fukuyama, end of history, was generally correct. I think, I think 35 years later or however long it's been, the theories put forth there have basically held up. The world is getting less poor, less violent. We have issues, but kind of turning away from liberalism isn't the answer to it.
As you mentioned earlier, there are some people who still say, your tone has changed, but your convictions have not. You're still bigoted. You're still racist, especially when it comes to matters of race or, group level statistical disparities, which is still kind of a touche subject. I wonder if you can kind of reflect on what you reject from your past and what these people are picking up on that is maybe less of a rejection or more of a reclassification, if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been less of that as time goes on. It's really been like more and more just kind of the blue sky crowd who says these things. I think especially over the last year or so, where I've seen kind of the Trump immigration crackdown, I've spoken up pretty aggressively against a lot of the things that the administration is doing. But, I know you want a little bit of a more explanation of kind of, the nuances of my thought. So yeah, first of all, I mean, there's statistical things that I once believed that are just not true. Like immigrants commit a lot of crime, that immigrants are inevitably going to be left-wing, that a more racially diverse country is required to have more kind of ethnic unrest or, is going to balkanize based on race. I've written a lot. That stuff is just things that I once believed that are wrong. Now, there are other things that are kind of mainstream conservatism that are still true. Groups do differ in racial demographics, do differ in crime rates. I don't think people can deny that. I think that, this is much less of an issue now that kind of there's been a backlash to wokeness. So I don't even bother talking about this anymore because, in 2020, 2021, you really had to push back against this stuff. But the idea was basically if one group got arrested more than the other, that was evidence of discrimination on behalf of society. If one group has a higher income than the other, that's also a cause of discrimination. The fact that we couldn't talk about these things, that you couldn't, the people on the left could just stand up and say, here's a disparity, therefore there is discrimination. A lot of that stuff was tied into the illiberalism we saw on the college campuses, the anti-free speech stuff. So yeah, on those things, that's true, but you can understand that and make those arguments in the context of liberal values. It doesn't take you to white identity politics, which in a lot of ways is in contradiction to like a scientific, open-minded understanding of group differences. For example, I've been looking a lot. There's a lot of anger at Indian immigration in America among online writers. Indians have the highest income in America. You'll see a lot of people say that this is because they're kind of cheating or they're scheming, and this sounds a lot like wokeness. This sounds a lot like activists who say because white people earn more money than black people, this is due to racism or in-group favoritism. And I just reject that across the board.
You mentioned this earlier, but you had to have some level of open-mindedness even as you believed these pretty extreme things. Do you remember like the first thing you read or first study you read where you kind of started to question yourself? And do you remember what that felt like?
So I do remember there's been a few people who've talked about this stuff that I've written about that kind of changed my views. So one of them, and this is going to be funny. Ron Unz, who believes all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories, who's an anti-Semite, who's kind of crazy, but he did say some things about race that were interesting. I was in Chicago at the time, and he said he's actually a kind of a liberal on immigration and some of these racial issues. And he said, you go to California, you'll see the racial dynamics there. It's not like being in an inner city in the Midwest from Chicago where you're from. It's not Chicago or Detroit. You can go to Southern California and you can be all around Asians and Hispanics and nobody's talking about racial politics. So Unz was vindicated. I wrote an article that was kind of a parody of like Unz like hanging out with a bunch of alt-right people called Ron Unz confronts the far right. So Unz was, I still think a lot of the stuff he publishes is insane, but actually like that was kind of in some ways he was very sane and kind of very cogent on the immigration issue. And then other people, Brian Kaplan, my good friend, there's Alex Nawasta at the Cato Institute. They're pro-immigration people. They're also people who were not woke or like left wing. Like they didn't deny that, humans, there are IQ differences between individuals, that a lot of, there's different crime rates between groups. That was something they didn't deny, but then they still came to the position that we should treat people as individuals, and immigration is still better for society, even if every group doesn't perform exactly equally well. So yeah, Brian Kaplan, Alex Nawasta, they both remain good friends of mine, and just seeing people who like accepted parts of reality who weren't just kind of, because I could dismiss everyone else or a lot of other people as saying these are dogmatic leftists, so what they say doesn't mean a lot, but a lot of the people who didn't accept a lot of the left-wing ideas that I thought were frankly absurd, seeing those people say, nonetheless, white nationalism is wrong, identity politics is wrong, you could even be pro-immigration for an open society, that had a huge effect on me.
I wonder, I think about some of the things I thought in college, and I'm kind of stunned with my own ideological transformation, and it's not fun. It's often really uncomfortable. And I wonder if there's ever been a level of guilt or discomfort around the things you used to think and said publicly, and if you reckon with that at all.
Yeah, it was the worst part about being exposed was people who were, the right-wing people, they actually liked it or they didn't care about, racism. But I had a lot of fans who were, kind of academics, who were middle of the road people. And to them, it was kind of not in their culture that anyone would ever talk like this. So there was a lot of guilt, around that. I don't know if it's guilt. It was just kind of embarrassment. And I wanted to get out there and say, I no longer believe these things. I think just watching kind of events unfold, kind of seeing kind of this white identity politics take over the Republican Party, seeing the rise of anti-Semitism, the small role I had in making that acceptable or infecting people with these ideas. Yeah, I do feel bad for that. And part of my job now is to say, look, I've been there. This is not going in a good direction. You're wrong on a lot of things, and you should change. The people who would have been reading me, 15 years ago are the people that I'm trying to reach now.
I wonder where you kind of fall now, if you would describe yourself as politically homeless, even though I kind of hate that term. And I guess more broadly, what your assessment of the right is, because it's changed so much.
Yeah, I am, I'm a believer in free markets. I believe in, individual liberty. I think it's harder and harder with this administration, although the Republican Party has been classically closer to my political opinions. There's a lot, the people who are talking about Trump and authoritarianism, I think a lot of that stuff has been vindicated. I'm kind of horrified with what's going on with ICE and Border Patrol in Minnesota, and just kind of like the naked corruption of it, the people donating to Trump and getting pardons, the way that, when we just had the Alex Preddy shooting, the way that they just come out and start smearing this guy because he got shot by the government and like making stuff up that's not even, it's not even like stuff that we can see with our own eyes that refutes what their narrative is. It's disturbing that people talk about post-truth a lot, people talking about tribal bubbles. I feel like this administration, and particularly on this immigration stuff, is really taking it to another level. And so, yeah, I am, I'm pro free market. I am pro individual rights. I'm pro a kind of strong American foreign policy. I'll still praise the administration when they do something good. I thought the raid on Maduro in Venezuela, I thought that was a good thing to do. But yeah, there's no political party, obviously, right now that reflects everything I believe. I think the Democrats are the lesser of two evils because the Republican Party does have this kind of white nationalist authoritarian streak that needs to be stopped. But yeah, I'm obviously far from comfortable in the Democratic coalition.
I wonder, what your advice or maybe prescription is for the kinds of people, especially young men, who are kind of finding themselves in these dark corners of the internet that, compared to when you were writing in 2013, are far more concerning. There are places like Discord, like Roblox, where this kind of behavior is very much encouraged, and there are people publicly praised for saying those things. What's your kind of message to that cohort that you're trying to reach?
I think that once you understand the kind of the psychological dynamics at work, it kind of takes away a lot of the magic of it, right? If you're sitting around and you're thinking, I am kind of going in this direction because my life is bad, I want to convince people, first of all, that's true. But for most people, I do think like the self-help thing is very important. Like I think there's the idea, like I tell a lot of young men, like go out there, talk to women, like make friends. Like this is probably the best possible thing you can do. You would be a lot less angry. That energy would focus a lot less on politics. I think that on the intellectual level, not that there's no role for ideas. I think I have some credibility to say, look, I'm not woke. I'm very anti-woke. I've seen those arguments, but a lot of them are wrong. And a lot of this stuff is just, kind of psychologically and spiritually corrosive. And so that's part of it. Just saying like, I'm the kind of person who I get it. I get it, as much as anybody, and why you would fall into this trap. But like the idea is a lot of what you believe is just wrong. And there is like a world beyond the internet. I know for young people, that's harder and harder to see, but it is. And once you get out there, you'll find that it's much better than whatever you're finding on these message boards or on Twitter or whatever.
Do you have advice on just the very simple act or question, which is how do you actually change your mind in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, I think like how do you change your mind in a meaningful way? It really does depend on kind of what kind of person you are. I think that you have to start from the premise that it's very unlikely that one political tribe is right about everything. And so we talked about kind of the dark corners of the internet, but it's just they're still partisans. I mean, they're just partisans of some subset of the right. And so you'll see people online, and you just have to have self-awareness, because you'll see people like I saw somebody who was a big pro-life advocate, and suddenly when an ICE shooting happens, becomes like the right-wing person who's going to talk all day about why this shooting was justified and why these leftists shouldn't be promoting ICE. And there's like nothing in common with these two positions. And you will find this again and again. People who think their side is right on economics, they'll think their side is right on abortion, they'll think their side is right on like which side lies more, or which side is more honest, or which side has kind of the moral high ground in some debate over the filibuster or something like that. You see this all the time. And I think just like realizing that this is a narcotic. This is like any other narcotic. The idea that you have found some kind of truth, and having people that you can feel you can identify with, then having people that you dislike, having a common enemy, that gets very deep in kind of who we are, psychologically. And I think understanding that but people also want to be like honest, and they want to be good people. And like, there's also people out there who don't think like this, and like are going to think you're a fool if you're going out there just taking the party line, whatever the bag or whatever the left-wing line is on any particular day. And so yeah, I think cultivating some level of self-awareness in people is really important, because I'm just floored by seeing like how predictable people tell me, oh, I like you because your views are unpredictable, or you take heterodox or kind of contradictory positions. And I just like, it kind of comes natural to me. And for other people, it's like, how do you not see this? How do you not see you are just waking up every day, and whatever Trump happens to say, or whatever's the opposite of whatever the media happens to say, that's your position? Like, how do you not see that? I just think just beating that into people's heads, I don't know if it works, but that's been my strategy.
I wonder if kind of since this intellectual reckoning, there have been moments where your mind slips in a way, or if there are ways that you kind of ensure your, like, how do you identify your own intellectual error? And do you have complete trust in yourself that you're not, diverting back to old ways of thinking, because so much of it is about engaging with new ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I am, like, I still might make mistakes. I think that, like, slipping back into the old pattern is probably the least likely thing I'm going to do, just because I've thought about it a lot and kind of have had a revulsion towards these things and kind of defined myself in opposition to a lot of the ideas that I once held. But it doesn't mean that I couldn't be subject to new forms of biases. Maybe I'm going too far, and maybe when I talk about the Trump administration being authoritarian and white nationalist, maybe I'm just reacting too much to the way I was before. I don't think so. I think I do a good job of kind of separating what's true and what's false, being able to say the administration's okay in this one way, but is really, really awful in this other way. Yeah, I mean, you just got to practice good epistemological standards. You have to kind of see yourself as a person whose loyalty is to the truth and ethics rather than conservatism or libertarianism or whatever it may be. That's really the only thing any of us can do.
Is there anything I missed that you think is important to add?
Um, yeah, I mean, look, I think it's just good. I mean, I like that you're doing this series. I like kind of the tact you've taken, the questions you've asked, because these are questions that like all of us are kind of struggling with. I want to kind of make arguments, but I also want to model to people like it's okay to be completely embarrassed by the person you were 10 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago. More recently, I was on a live stream the night Trump was elected. And, we're talking about 15 years ago, I was, ashamed of those things. But like the night that Trump was elected, I was on a live stream with Destiny, the streamer. And I said, he said, man, Trump is going to appoint RFK, he's going to destroy public health. I said, he's not going to appoint RFK. And if he appoints RFK, I will have been wrong. Okay. I will have made a mistake here. And Trump appoints RFK. He does a lot of things that I didn't think he would do, like go really crazy on the tariffs. And it's like I already had changed my mind on like some other things. And like I'm thinking at this point, like people are gonna think that no, this is just like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But I said it. I said if he's gonna appoint RFK, I will have made a mistake. And I admitted that I had made a mistake. So it's like you can do this. You can say you were wrong. No one is going to come out and like execute you. People will often admire it, and if you can if you can give the reasons why, what changed, like you put a prediction on the table, it's on the record. Something happens. People whose opinions are worth worrying about will think more of you if you go back and revisit your beliefs than if you just change the subject or forget that it ever happened or come up with, some post hoc justification of why you're not going to change your beliefs. So I think just like we should be more open to this. Just people should understand that like if you're seeking truth, if you really care about ideas, you're going to get things wrong. And if you're afraid to admit things you've gotten things wrong, or if you're kind of afraid of how it's going to look, you're never going to improve. You're going to be stuck in the same place. So I hope others kind of follow this advice and see what I've done and, learn from my mistakes and hopefully also see that they can change and they can change their mind. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end what was a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for the time, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maya.